Welcome to the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Matt Lutovsky, and we are through the trade deadline nexus, if you will. We are headed for the rest of the season, final 2 months, going to come down to the wire, and a lot of fantasy leads, and of course, owners with all that roster turnover and changes at the major league level are going to be looking for any edge they can get with all of this, turmoil and choppiness at the major in rosters in the major leagues. It might have caused a lot of problems for them here, or the optimist might say opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the tendency is to focus on the guys actually traded. We focus a lot on Ubaldo Jimenez. We focus on Derek Lee getting moved and things like that. And, that's important. But the fact is, when someone gets traded, an opportunity opens up for someone else to fill their role on that team. And I think one of the interesting ones is Rafael Furcal getting traded out of Los Angeles, where, he's been garbage this year. I mean, he really has. I thought it was funny when he hit the 3-run homer yesterday, and I said, look, everyone, a corpse just hit a home run. Because that's what it's felt like for Furcal this year. But him getting out of L.A. opens the door for D. Gordon to come back up, play every day. And Gordon, he's a little water bug, but he's fast and he's going to steal bases. And if you need stolen bases, especially from a shortstop, thin position, I mean, he should be on your team because that's a good opportunity there.
If you're a Dodgers fan, it's not the greatest thing in the world because it is a sign that they've given up on this year. Right. And Gordon doesn't really project to be all that much of a hitter in real life.
Right.
In fantasy, though, he has the potential to be an exceptionally impactful player just because he has stolen bases like mad in the minors and translates, or is at least projected to do so at the major league level at a pretty good rate.
Right, and in a similar spot we have Bourgeois in Houston taking over when they sent out both Bourne and Hunter Pence.
Wait, who is that?
Jason Bourgeois.
Jason Bourgeois.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's how it's pronounced. I don't know. They call him Jay Boogie, and why not? But he's another elite base stealer, and he's been hitting well this year. I don't think he will continue at the pace he'd been on in his limited at-bats, but a big-time base stealer from the outfield who, if you need stolen bases, Roto League, whatever, he's a guy to look at.
And in some leagues with more lax positional requirements, may even have second base eligibility there. He did play a little bit there earlier, and middle infield and so on and so forth, depending on what your limitations are.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other trade, when Houston traded Bourne, that opened the door for this J.D. Martinez kid who was raking at AAA, 338, 414, 546 was his triple slash. I mean, he can hit a little bit, and he's a guy, if you're, in a deep league and you're looking for that fifth outfielder, give him a shot. He's not a big name. You don't hear him a lot on the prospect list the way you heard other guys. But he's hitting at AAA. He could come up. He could have a nice couple of weeks, maybe even finish out the year on a pretty good note. So, again, there's value there when those spots open up.
What do you think about the two relatively, I guess you say they kind of fizzled, but the relatively biggest trades as far as moving out a veteran to just put the young kid in there? I'm specifically talking about Jason Kipnis in Cleveland and then Paul Goldschmidt in Arizona. Both guys who should be on Prospect Maven's radar should now definitely be on Fantasy Manager's radar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Goldschmidt, we've been getting questions about for a long time, and I kept telling people that Arizona's in a pennant race. They have other first base options. He's only at AA. It'll take a while, and then all of a sudden, snap of the fingers, Brandon Allen gets traded for Brad Ziegler, Paul Goldschmidt's called up, and he's playing every day. And this guy absolutely was killing the ball at AAA.
AA?
I'm sorry. At AA, skip AAA. He's already hit a homer, he's already stolen a base at the major league level. I don't think he's going to be a consistent force the way a lot of people are hoping, but he's worth grabbing. He's worth taking that flyer on if you're second, third, fourth place team that's I don't want to say grasping at straws, but you're just kind of hoping. You're buying lottery tickets at this point for your team. And I think Kipnis, he's proven it too. He's hit some homers, and I think he's going to be a real solid player at the middle infield spots.
Now, would you say that both of these guys, I would guess, are definitely not in the top 12 at their position, second base for Kipnis, first base for Goldschmidt. But as you said, utility spot, have them on your roster in case it turns out that, they're pulling. Kipnis could pull a Neil Walker, like Walker did last year, and all of a sudden, you've got this really solid top 12 guy for nothing.
Yeah, it's worth a flyer if you're playing catch up, and especially if they provide something in the specific categories you need. If you're really down in power, grab Goldschmidt. He's in a great ballpark, and he's on a team that swings for the fences, so he can help you there.
What do you think about the pitching? Like, we talked a little bit about Ubaldo. We mentioned that. How do you see that trade working out for the Indians and for the Rockies?
I think it'll be good for the Indians. I mean, Ubaldo's a really good pitcher, and everyone's talking about how he's lost.
Yeah, let's not lose sight of that.
Right, and everyone's talking about how he's lost his zip on his fastball, and he has, but he still has the 10th fastest fastball among starters. I mean, he still throws hard. It's not as hard as he used to, but he throws hard. He's out of Coors, which traditionally over his career, he's pitched, it's been about even, his home road splits. This year, though, is horrible at home. Getting him out of Coors Field, even going to the AL, I think it's a good thing for him. And then I think it'll be interesting to see if some of the guys that the Rockies got back in that deal, particularly Alex White, who had a cup of coffee in the majors earlier this year with Cleveland, he's rehabbing a finger injury. He could be back. He could be starting in September, and he's the kind of guy with a real good minor league pedigree who, could be one of those spot start guys you just grab at the end of the year.
What about the most fun trade to talk about, which would be the one between Detroit and Seattle?
Yes, Doug Fister for Charlie Furbush, two of our favorite names around the Fantasy Source office. There were other players involved. There's a guy named Casper involved.
Yes.
And he was the number 3 fun name to say in that deal. Tells you everything you need to know. But Furbush and then Blake Beavan now have spots.
Once again, the 4th fun name.
There you go. Both have spots now in the Mariners rotation with Fister and Bedard going out. And these are guys who, Furbush has really good minor league numbers, high K guy in the minors. We saw him last night. He made his first start with the Mariners through 5 innings, a 1-run ball, 2 hits. He's a guy who could have value going forward. Next week, bad week for him at Texas and then versus Boston. But if he can get through that, and he's still on your wire, which I'm sure he will be, he's a guy to consider. And Beavan's pitched well, real low K rate, which, is never a good sign for a guy. But, maybe he can keep kind of getting lucky and keep his ERA down. But those are two guys in that ballpark are guys to watch.
In many ways, this trade kind of exemplifies why so many fantasy managers go into their drafts way back in March, just thinking, I'm going to draft the hitters and I'll figure out the pitching as I go along. I might get one pitcher that I can truly rely on, but I'm just going to try to piece it all together during the year. Because Doug Fister has been an amazing ERA guy so far this year. He's got horrific run support. Yeah. But now that he's in Detroit, even if he's only half as good as he was with ERA and whip-wise, he's going to add to his wins, and he's going to be a reasonably valuable pitcher.
Yeah, and we saw that last night. He went out, got the win. He finally got some runs. But I think the other thing, too, and kind of going back to your point about when people do a draft, they say, okay, I'll find this throughout the year. A lot of people say that about saves. Right. And this year hasn't been great for that. I mean, obviously guys have popped up. There's been turnover at the closer spot. But there weren't many spots opened up at the trade deadline like there usually is. And everyone thought Heath Bell would get traded, open the door for Mike Adams. As it turned out, Mike Adams gets traded. And that's interesting because it's easy to just say, well, Heath Bell's still there, forget about it. But now there's a new next in line in San Diego, as there is in Baltimore with Koji Uehara going to Texas too. So just keep that in mind. If something happens to Bell or Kevin Gregg, you're probably looking at Mike Gonzalez in Baltimore and Chad Qualls probably. They'll get the veteran preferential treatment in San Diego. Those could be some guys to pick up for saves if something happens to the incumbents.
Yeah, and Neftali Feliz isn't going anywhere. So those other setup guys, you can pretty much say, drop them, would you say?
Well, I like them because they're both really good. And and Feliz, he has been up and down this year. He hasn't been lights out, but he will have to blow saves in order for one of those two guys to get a chance. And right now, I'd say his job is fairly safe.
All right, Matt. Well, thanks for joining us, talking about the deadline.
All right.